Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
Martin Luther, of course, was one of the great movers of the Christian Reformation over the course of the 16th century. And he was driven, we talked about this the other night, he was driven really by what he saw was the corruption of the church. And in the end, he just couldn't take it. So he posted in the church in Wittenberg, in a town, one of the German towns, where he lived there. He posted on the church his 95 theses, which all of his whole list of critiques and everything of the Catholic Church. That was in 1517. He was born, by the way, in 1483. And he died in 1546. So, but in 1517, he posted those 95 theses and continued his ranting and raving and got into debates and so forth and so on. And by 1521, the Pope formally excommunicated him and considered him to be a criminal. And he had to hide for a while, but eventually he found his bearings. And, but he continued to fight the fight. He got married, and then it's really interesting. At some point, nobody knows exactly when, he was working on a German translation of the Bible, and he wrote the classic German translation of the Bible, which came out in 1543. Okay, remember that date, 1543. Sometime prior to 1536. And we say that that's another date to remember, 1536. Sometime prior to that time, he arranged a meeting with three of the leading German rabbis. Okay, and these were traditional guys. At that point in time, there was no Reformed Judaism, right? They were all what we would call Orthodox, normal believing rabbis. And he came with his own Christian interpretation of the Bible, whatever sections he was teaching. He was really interested in biblical law. Anyway, so maybe in sections from the Torah. Anyway, so he brought his interpretation, and he asked the rabbis to prepare theirs. And so he presented his, which of course were heavy on Christological interpretations, and the rabbis presented theirs, and Jesus, anything related to Jesus, didn't pop up at all. And at that point, And so at that point, something snapped in him, because it's after 1536 that he begins to go on his anti-Jewish tirade. So some historians suggest that moment may have done it, because here he's studying Bible with the leading, whom he considered the leading rabbis in Germany, the people who understood Judaism more than anybody else. And yet they couldn't understand that the Bible deals with Jesus. And he said his thinking was, my God, if this is what the best Jewish minds think, imagine what the rest of them think. And on that basis, he flipped. And from that point on, he began talking. And then here's the interesting thing, 1543. That's the year where he published, in which his German translation of the Bible was published. And by the way, he was a bit of a Hebraist. He did not know Hebrew, but he read certain earlier Christian Catholic interpretations of the Bible written by Christians who knew Hebrew. In fact, in some places, in some of his writings, he actually Martin Luther refers to Rashi. Now, I guarantee you, he didn't read Rashi's commentary on the Bible, but the sources that he looked at, there he read Rashi in the Hebrew. Okay, so he knew a little bit. He was a student. The man was not dumb. May have been evil, but he wasn't dumb. Sometimes, when you're evil and smart, that's really bad. Okay. Anyway, excuse me. So in 1543, then his translation comes out. That's the same year that he writes on the Jews and their lies, which is what we're going to read, out of which selections we're going to read, and another writing called the Shem HaMeforash, which refers to God's four-letter name. Shem HaMeforash means the explicitly laid out version of God's real name. Meforash means the basic, clear meaning, okay? He heard that term, and basically what he tries to argue there is that they really don't understand the meaning of God's name. They claim to, but they really don't. Okay, so the Shem HaMeforash is Yud He Vav He, right? The ineffable name, the name that we don't know, that we do not pronounce, we don't know how to pronounce it. That's the name that the high priest would use only on Yom Kippur. Okay. Anyway, so in 1543, it's just coincidental. His Bible and these two small books of his appear. And what he wrote became, coming from this great learned person within the Lutheran Church, these ideas began to percolate, okay? And, there's no direct line between that and where we're going to end up in terms of modern anti-Semitism. And you can't make it, leads to it's clouded, but at the same time, it's there. And this transmission moves down the line, okay? And we're going to see later on where it ends up. Okay, so everything that you have, I sent you, it was taken directly out of the Jewish virtual library text. There are some mistakes in it. I didn't fix it because I just, copy paste. That was it. And I let it stay as it is. You'll see there's some wordings occasionally that makes no sense, but don't worry about that. It doesn't affect our understanding. All right, so we're going to now read about the Jews and their lies, but he goes further beyond lying in terms of talking about what our problems or why we are such a problem. And it's in this context that you begin to see certain ideas that will resonate with German nationalists in the 20th century. Okay, and by the way, there are modern critics who argued that Nazism did not have anything directly to do with religion. It was secular. Okay, and they point to when people would raise Martin Luther as an example, the argument back was, no, but he was not a racist because he allows for conversion of the Jews. Therefore, he could not be a racist. Well, okay, that having been said, but what he writes, as you will see, comes very close to that because he has these sweeping statements about the character of the Jew, okay? But yes, if you are a real devout believer and you converted, yes, in fact, the church is, the Christian community is obligated to support you in that. But his belief is, as you will see, that it would be a very small percentage of the Jews, a tiny percentage, who would do that kind of thing. All right? But the point is, though, there are other elements in his writing. He is, if you've paid attention, we'll see this, very much a nationalist. He speaks of the German people, of the religion of the Germans. He doesn't speak from a global perspective here. It's mostly coming out of being a German. And that kind of nationalism resonated, with Nazis or with Germans who believed in Luther and Lutheranism, but also were nationalists in the modern sense, and they interpreted all of the characteristics that Luther presents as being inherent within Jews. They interpreted that within the racist perspective of Nazism. And at a certain point in certain parts of the country, that melding took place. All right, now, and that's something that subsequent research, because suddenly they pulled out, the stuff was found, and I don't know, in the 90s, after the Russian Revolution of the 90s took place, the archives of Holocaust material opened up, and I think you may be aware of that. And all kinds of documents that heretofore had not been read were found. Okay, and that changed a lot. It didn't it actually validated a lot of things that people had been saying about the Holocaust and how it came about, because their documentary evidence just supported everything that had been said. So it's possible that certain perspectives became more clear. And well, I'll get to that later on when we talk about what we now know happened in Germany in the 1930s, leading up to the takeover by Nazism. All right. So, but there's no question in my mind, at least, that this man, had fed into an approach to Nazism that was intertwined with their religious perspective. Bert.
I know we'll probably get to this, but it's a question. So he had this meeting with these rabbis and then became venomous against Jews. Do you think that part of that had to do with just the meeting really didn't go well and a personality thing between him and them?
Hard to know. It's hard to know.
Yeah, okay.
I can't answer that. But I mean, it's the thing like, the parallel that's often made is with Muhammad, right? Muhammad was convinced that the Jews would come flocking to him. And we'll talk about this soon. After this, we're going to look at Islamic anti-Semitism. But that he believed that he would bring Jews to Allah. And he said, which is the God of Moses. His whole perspective was that the true meaning of the words of Moses were found in his teachings, not in the teachings of the Bible. And that the people who wrote down the Bible, in particular the Torah, made mistakes and misunderstood. He had the right meaning. Therefore, the Jews would come flocking. And this came in the context. He fled Mecca to Medina. That's where he had waged war against his pagan enemies. He expected that the Jews would join him, but instead they aligned themselves with the pagans because they had done business with them for years. They had relations. And this got Muhammad so angry that he flipped. Okay, so there is a kind of a parallel. It's the unrequited love, right? I love you, I love you, I love you. Why don't you love me? Oh, that's because you hate me. Okay, thanks. And that psychologically that happens. It's nothing unusual, But here, of course, we see it in a global sense. So it's that same deep disappointment. And again, he thought he had a bond. The fact that he could even, I don't know exactly what he laid out in front of them, but he may have actually cited Rashi, and where he thought Rashi was saying things that would be, you could associate with Jesus. Rashi understood this. Why don't you, Rabbi? Clearly, Rashi was an exception. Okay, whatever. So I don't know if it was a personality clash. If his ego was shattered, it may have been. That I don't know. But clearly, he was a thinking person, and a man of faith, and he probably walked in just exploding with all kinds of love that he can teach these people and show them the truth, and they would jump because they know best, and it failed. So how much of that is his ego? How much of that is his faith? I have no way. I never psychoanalyzed the guy, and I'm not going to. Okay, not my job. Barbara, then I want to begin. Go ahead. Yeah, Barbara.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. When he talked to the rabbis, he had already established his Lutheran religion? Or, what was he trying to convert?
Yes, his thinking already was percolating before 1517. Remember, his formal rejection of Catholicism was in 1517.
Right.
Continued to evolve and develop between 1517 and 1543. At what point he became deeply engaged in understanding a Jewish perspective of the Hebrew Bible, I don't know. I'm sure an expert on his biography would know. I don't know.
But did he have followers?
Oh, yes, of course. He began to collect followers. When he ultimately, he had a movement going.
He had a movement going.
When he died, people were coming because the points, the Catholic Church, had been under attack in different ways for centuries at that point. Okay.
No, but did he have?
Yeah, I don't know.
Did he have a movement going in
yes,
1536?
Yes. There was
he had followers.
Okay. He had followers, yes.
Okay.
What the percentage was, I don't know.
I don't care about that. I just want to know that he had followers.
Yes. There's no question.
Okay. Who are we talking about?
Martin Luther.
Yeah, I want to add a point, if I may, about him. I read some of his stuff, and I really traced a lot of the Nazism to him. And he wrote.
Jackie, let me stop you. We're going to talk about that at the end.
Okay, I just want to say that he quoted Paul, so-called St. Paul, and he quoted Paul, and everything he quoted from Paul was bad about the Jews. So my question to you is, that meeting with the rabbis, was that after, if he had already written that about what Paul said about the Jews, then the rabbi meeting wouldn't have mattered?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't.
Have you read him about Paul? He quotes all the bad things Paul said about Paul.
I mean, you're going to see when even material we read, whatever he cites,
right?
It's the same thing. Yeah, okay. I'm not surprised. He obviously, I see, Margaret, I see your hand. Clearly, he didn't pay much attention to Paul to chapters 10 and 11, where he changed his tone a bit.
Right. I like that you showed us both sides. That's really important. Paul wrote both.
Yeah. Well, he talked about this. Remember, Paul was angry in his early years because he had just been basically kicked out of synagogues.
Okay.
And the Jewish community turned against him. He was even arrested a couple times because the Jews come to get him out of here. This was 1st century CE when the Jews were really in charge. There were no Christians, Anyway. But eventually, as he matured, he realized that he was Jewish, and he says so at the end. I got this covenant on my shoulder. I can't get rid of it. It's from God. And God has that same feeling with the Jewish people still today. He was saying, when the second coming comes, the Jews will come into the church. That's what he says. But now, and he doesn't show great love, but respect. And there's a difference. Okay, Margaret.
I just want to say that every time we have this class, I think to myself, what I really, and I know, Rabbi, you just said it's not my job to do any psychoanalysis, but I feel like looking at these historical phenomena with I guess a psychoanalytic lens is actually potentially quite helpful for a lot of different reasons, not just reconciling oneself with the history and cultivating optimism moving forward, understanding the people who, and of course, there's always the danger of projection and so on. But, and then, Jackie just said something about Martin Luther's potential predisposition against the Jews. I mean, I would think that's a given. He's definitely against the Jews. He definitely did not go into a meeting with rabbis thinking that they were his learned equals. 100% no. I mean, that's just not even that's so hard to imagine. It's like saying, we went to visit the Yanomami and we were like, please send us your received wisdom. I mean, cultures don't mesh like this. Right. And I'm sure he had a prejudice.
Yeah, it's possible.
So the question in my mind is, well, not the explosive content of the meeting, but what is it about a person, and what is it about a culture or a society, local or broad, that allows such prejudices to flourish?
Yeah.
That I think is it's to me a very interesting question.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, we know that he has written, that he talked. He told people that we have to take care of the Jews. I mean, he was aware of the fact that the Jews had suffered. Remember, we're talking now 16th century. We're talking at a time when German communities are kicking Jews out of the country, okay? And in fact, their status, their political and economic status, is in decline. And from a certain perspective, he did have Rahmanas. He had compassion on them. He said, we can't do these things. We have to protect. And I think he may, I'm not going to deny, again, I don't know. But did he have ambivalence? I'm sure he did. Because, he knew the Gospels. He knew Paul's writings, right? He knew church writings. He was a learned man. And there's a lot of negative stuff he absorbed. There's no question about that. But at the same time, because he had this hope that he found the answer, because he really believed, and he writes that he believed that when he once he states what he represents, the Jews would understand that it was the Pope and it's the Church that kept them away from Jesus because of their corruption and their inherent evil. He even makes a reference here to Peter, right? That the Church always falls back on, Peter will be on this rock I shall build my church, right? And that's the Pope who claimed that. And he makes a little snide remark here. It's not his main topic, but that's the Pope, claiming something that was not intended to be said. And here he's criticizing the Pope, of course. So I think that was his sincere belief. And so at this meeting with the rabbis, that's why I'm suggesting that optimistic side within him. I've got the answers right here. I'm going to lay it out, and they're smart enough to understand. And when they absolutely rejected it, even though they said, I don't know what they said to him. If they said, no, you got it all wrong. I don't know if they said that. But the fact that Jesus was nowhere on the radar screen in anything they said. And he doesn't sound like he said that they began to say all the negative things about Jesus that is in Jewish literature by then. Not popular, but it's around. We know that, right? But apparently that's not what they were responding. It's just the absence of Jesus in their thinking. And so that was a button. I would say, let's say here's the extremes, okay? Hatred of the Jew going in, hatred of the Jew coming out. All right. So when he, and this is in the middle, right? So I would say, when he meant to meet the rabbis, he's floating somewhere over here, right? And let's say this is love of the Jew, okay? So he's floating somewhere over here. One second, hold on. Wait a minute. That was anyway. So he's somewhere over here, right in the middle. And when what their answer does, he's probably in a state of shock. He walks away, and it's something like that, because you don't find the extreme that we have in what we're going to read, in things that we know he wrote and that he talked about prior to that time. Okay, and whether he anticipated this or not, I have no idea. Was it even a possible reality in his mind? No idea. Okay, I just don't know enough. But I understand what you're saying, but sometimes people's minds snap, right? And something that was latent becomes blatant. Yeah. Okay, did I see a hand? Oh, that was my hand.
Yeah. Actually, I was just going to make one small comment.
Bert, go ahead.
It's hard enough to understand Torah if one understands Hebrew or one is guided. But to try and interpret Torah, as many non-Jews do, only in translation,
right,
can really lead to a lot of misinterpretations.
Sure.
They say it's hard enough in the original Hebrew,
right,
because a lot of it is not clear. But, you look at it in English and then you go off in some other place.
Yeah, you see that all the time, absolutely. Yeah. But I would say something else, since you mentioned it. You read the Hebrew Bible, and if you are so inclined, you can come away by saying, boy, that Jewish people, they're horrible. Look what God and the prophets had to say about them, right? It's right there. And we made a mistake. We washed our dirty linen in public. We laid it all out, because everything there, ultimately, God is to be the focal point. And if we miss the boat, we got to be held accountable, because that's how God operates, okay? And Paul got it right, ironically, because in the end, if you read the Bible over and over again, it says, but the covenant still exists. The covenant holds. The covenant holds. You're going to be punished, but the covenant holds. Okay? So I'm not saying we're to blame, because when that was all put together, who knew what was going to happen, right? The people who wrote the Bible were writing the Bible for the Israelites, right? They had no idea that sister-daughter religions would somehow pop out of them. And by the way, that's the other thing we got to keep in mind at all times. Sometimes daughters have problems with mama. Margaret, you want to talk about, psychological things. Why doesn't my mother leave me alone? Where is she today? What's going on? Right? I mean, happens. All right. Can we now read?
As we get older, it becomes different. Why won't my kids leave me alone and stop telling me what to do?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right. All right. Please, me. I'm talking. I got to save my. Somebody.
I'll read. I haven't had the paperwork in the past few weeks.
Okay.
You want me to start at the very top, which you've already.
No. Start with. I had made up my.
I had made up my mind to write no more either about the Jews or against them. But since I learned that these miserable and accursed people do not cease to lure to themselves even us, that is, the Christians, I have published this little book so that I might be found among those who oppose such poisonous activities of the Jews, who warned the Christians to be on guard against them.
So he's assuming that the Jews, for some reason, are running around trying to convert Christians to Judaism. Now, where he got that, I have no idea.
Yeah, because that's the exact opposite of us.
By then, yes.
If somebody wants to convert, we'll happily accept them, but we don't go out.
We were not there.
Pulling them in.
First of all, it was against the laws. Second of all, believe me, they were more just interested in saving their own necks. And so where he got that, I have no idea. What Margaret, you're saying something. I can't hear you. It looks very...
No, I just wanted to ask really quickly. You mentioned by then, yes, which I wondered, was there a period of proselytization?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, the only time that pops up is in antiquity, late antiquity, after that, no. I mean, if somebody wanted to join, yeah. But remember, the tradition evolved that, I don't know if today this is still followed in the Orthodox community, but it used to be the potential convert had to be pushed away 3 times before the conversion could take place, before it was agreed upon. All right? Okay. So he now says, I have got to be among those now who speak out against them. And it's interesting he should say this. All right? And now maybe the rabbis said things to him that left him with the opinion that they're trying to get me. I don't know. Okay. All right, Bert, just quickly, because I want to move on.
Yeah, that Judaism is not a universalist religion. In other words, it clearly in Torah, it's a religion for Jews. And that's very different from Christianity, which is supposed to be a religion for absolutely everybody.
Right.
So if I believed that and I had the truth and you were a Jew, I would want to convert you because I love you into conversation.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yes. Okay. Moving on. Barbara, continue.
However, the devil is the god of the world, and wherever God's word is...
Wait. Hold on.
Did I skip a sentence? Oh, I would not have believed that a Christian could be duped by the Jews into taking their exile and wretchedness upon himself.
In other words, convert. Why would somebody convert to a situation which puts them in exile and wretchedness?
Good question.
And that's the whole point. Exactly. That's why the Jews were not doing any conversion. Very few people wanted to convert to Jew. Maybe he heard of some individuals, and there were such individuals, intelligent Christians, learned Christians, who studied and learned, and ultimately they realized that they needed to become Jewish. You can count them on your 2 hands. They existed. There's no question. I studied the literature that came out of that. And very often, like all converts, they were really zealous in their job and horribly demeaning of the religion from which they came. Maybe he heard about them. I mean, their books were now remember, it's 16th century. Books are being published. And it could very well be that some of these books, which I studied for my doctorate, Jewish criticism of the Christian Bible, not of Christianity, of Christianity. I mean, you had books that the Jews wrote in the 12th, 13th, 14th century, 15th, even down into the 16th century, even by German Jews. These notions of collecting materials that presented Christianity and the Christian Bible in horrible terms. And for all I know, he may have gotten hold of this, or somebody may have showed him something. But things are being published, and that means they're circulating, right? And that's one of the reasons why his stuff began to circulate so highly, okay? I remember
when I was a kid,
we talked about the same thing last week when we talked about Little St. John, right? And all where his stuff was being circulated, all that material we talked about. So it's the timing as well. All right, continue, Barbara.
When I was a kid, we had a family friend whose daughter that I didn't know well because she was a little older than me, married a man that converted. And I remember my mom telling me on multiple occasions how he had become almost Orthodox, was way more religious than Lois was.
Yeah.
And that just to confirm what you just said, that it's very common.
Yes. All right,
they
continue, Barbara. Yeah. Thank you.
However,
Barbara, wait, stop. Please continue reading. I want to move on.
That's what I was just trying to do.
Yeah, okay.
However, the devil is the god of the world, and wherever God's word is absent, he has an easy task, not only from the weak, but also from the strong.
What does it mean, devil? The devil is the god of the world.
You got me. I mean, God's supposed to be good. God's supposed to be wonderful. So I don't know why he's saying. Is he saying in the Lutheran religion that God is bad? The devil is?
The devil is bad, yes.
Yeah, Rabbi?
Tybal, yeah, go ahead.
Isn't it a comment on human frailty, not on God? That human beings are more, I got the young'un in the crowd, Margaret, who didn't unmute in time. The two of us are in agreement that this is not about God. This is about humanity's weakness, which if you go back to the whole original sin, which you'll tell me if any of the 93 were about original sin words differently, but there's a different idea about the essential nature of human beings.
Well, look, Lutheranism does not deny original sin.
And not just the essential nature of human beings, but the essential function of human beings vis-a-vis the physical world and the physical experience.
That's, I mean,
the Christian view, in my experience, which is pretty thorough, or whatever, because I am a convert, is that the world and worldliness and physicality are to absolutely be abstained from.
Right.
We want to separate ourselves from that.
That is the realm of the devil. In other words, that's where the devil manifests.
The lower order.
Exactly.
The lower order.
Exactly. Yeah. You're right. And that is that, the whole notion of the supremacy of the spirit over the physical, which is a strong sensitivity in Christianity, which comes from ancient Greek thinking, actually. The roots of it are in ancient Greek philosophy. Anyhow, but the point is, and that's where the Jews look. I mean, the Christians criticize the Jews all the time, that the law is physical, right? The law deals with this world. Love is the answer for the world to come. The Jews don't have that. We do. Jesus is love. Moses was law. Okay, law is this world, and that's because it is this world and not that world. The devil has say, and that's what this is saying. Yeah, exactly. Right. Good. Okay, moving on.
May God help us. Amen.
Amen. Right, but and also what he says here is God. Wherever God's word is absent, the devil has an easy task, not only with the weak, but with the strong. In other words, yes, if you don't have the right belief, the devil can move right in. By the way, that's something that's it's similar, and Kabbalah is that way, that if Jews, the sinfulness of the Jew, of the collective sinfulness of the Jewish people, can weaken the bond that exists within the 10 Sefirot and give space for the Sitra Achra, which is the dark side, to come in. And that's why we have to cleanse away our sinfulness in order for the 10 Sefirot to operate properly, so the Sitra Achra is locked out. But it's this notion that the sinfulness opens the door to the devil, right? Weakness, which is associated with indulgence in the physical, which has all of these, side effects of evil, right? I mean, that's it. So there's that little similarity that Kabbalah picks up, and whether it's influenced, these scholars go back and forth. What are the influences in that? It's. I'm not going to get into that discussion because my study of Kabbalah has not gone that deep. I know certain basics and I can share them with you, but I wouldn't claim to be an expert in Kabbalah. Okay. All right. Good. Moving on. Good. Somebody else, please. By the way, the he in the next paragraph is John the Baptist. John the Baptist, not Jesus talking here. I checked it out. Matthew 3:7, okay, and the reference in Matthew 11, John the Baptist. Because remember, who is John the Baptist? He's the Elijah announcing the coming of the Messiah. Oh. Right? And that's what Jesus says. It says, that's mentioned in the Christian Bible. Okay, so the criticism, he starts here with the criticism of the person who's here to proclaim the coming of the Messiah. All right, so compare John the Baptist with the papacy's claim to being Peter. Right, I guess he would say that claim has petered out. Okay, I didn't say that. Forget it. All right, who's going to read, please? He did not.
I can read.
Okay, thanks.
He did not call them Abraham's children, but a brood of vipers, Matthew 3:7. Oh, that was too insulting for the noble blood and race of Israel, and they declared he has a demon,
right.
Matthew 11:18.
Now stop for a second. So when I checked this out, where John is talking, what's going on here is a bunch of people are coming to bathe, to be in the water. Because he's the Baptist, to be baptized, so to speak, to be cleansed. And, bathing in water is a Jewish tradition that precedes Christianity. And John the Baptist, the whole thing behind this is he's just a super cleanser, right? He believes it's important that and by the Essenes did this, the Dead Sea sect would bathe in a ritual bath before every meal. They didn't just wash their hands.
Or every meal.
Yes. Every meal for them was a meal with God, literally. Okay, I'm not going. That I know about. I'm not going to go into it though. All right. Anyhow, so they're coming. So it says in Matthew chapter 3, the Pharisees and the Sadducees came to bathe. All right. So these are two of the groups. More so the Pharisees, who of course are very traditionalistic, and for whom Jesus running around preaching was a challenge and something they had to address. The Sadducees were not out in the open. The Pharisees were a problem to Jesus because they, like he, were public speakers. They would go around and preach and interpret. They were in synagogues. They would meet with people. They were activists, okay, in their interpretation. Sadducees were too tied up with the priesthood. They're less active, okay? That's not their style. All right, that's one of the reasons why they lost in the end. And the Pharisees won because they were out there with the folks, as was Jesus. So that's why you have a lot of conflicts going on. Yeah, the Sadducees would be criticizing Jesus because he was critical of the temple, as were many Pharisees, actually. But at the same time, so the Sadducees had things to say against us too. But so they're coming down to bathe, and John the Baptist confronts them, and he says, "What are you doing here? You're a brood of vipers." That's what it was. So basically, he's aiming it not at the Jews, as our dear friend Martin would have us believe. He's focusing on the ideological enemies of Jesus, and they're saying it's it doesn't make sense for you to do this. Okay, that's it. And then so that later on, when the Pharisees are talking, they say, chapter 11, John the Baptist, he has a demon in him, right? A demon's working in him. He's not normal, and he's been taken over by an evil force. Okay, all right. So that's that. Now, however, continue reading, Bert. We're going to read what
our Lord.
That's Jesus, right? Go ahead.
Our Lord also calls them a brood of vipers. Where is that?
Matthew also. Elsewhere.
Furthermore, in John 8, 39 and 44, he states, if you were Abraham's children, ye would do what Abraham did. You are of your father the devil. It was intolerable to them to hear that they were not Abraham's, but the devil's children, nor can they bear to hear this today.
Right. All right. So you are of your father the devil is one of the most negative statements that you can find coming out of Jesus' mouth.
And not of Abraham. You're not the children of Abraham.
Right, well, they claim, of course we are the children of Abraham. That's what our tradition tells us.
I'm saying what he's saying.
Yeah, right.
Is that we're not children of Abraham.
Exactly. He's denying it because you don't live like the children of Abraham, according to him. By the way, John, is among the most anti-Jewish because he was not a Christian, a Jew. He does not come from Jewish background. He's a Greek. He's a Hellenized citizen, Greco-Roman world, who converted to belief in Jesus. So look at the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was this, and the Word became flesh, right? Chapter 1 of the book of John. It's based on sort of Neoplatonist. It's a Neoplatonistic approach to how the world came into being, okay? And so he had background in philosophy. Good, okay, that's nice. But the point is, he's very venomous. So he will say, where the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, will talk about individual groups within, John will say the Jews and have this sweeping collective here. So that fits more into the approach, of course, that Martin Luther would be comfortable with. So citing this passage, but I'm saying when you have somebody saying that, and you look down the line, you talk about the horns in your head, right? The Jew, where does that come from? Well, it comes from this image that flows out of this, that we are of our father, the devil. The devil has horns. Jews have horns, to be very simplistic. But that's basically how it played out. And as I told you, we saw the pictures. Remember, I showed you in that book, where, images with devil, a picture of demons, who are the army of the devil, right? Or the devil himself, with the Jew badge on the chest. I showed you those. Or that was already first semester, okay? Yeah, but I'm reminding you, you saw them, right? Because they are Jewish. The devil is a Jew, or our Jew is the devil, okay? All right, so this whole theme of the devil is something that has been that was percolating around, for a long time. Well, who's had a hand up? Yeah, but Jackie.
I'm hearing that part that you're saying that so Jews are kind of born of the devil. So then Jesus was born of the devil because he was a Jew.
Right. But, yes. But
I tend to think that way. Like I'd love to argue with these people.
No,
of course,
but you can think whatever you want.
Yeah.
But that's John speaking. And, that's why the other guys aren't going to say that, because look, you read, the sad part about this whole thing is that Christians don't take seriously everything that's written in the Christian Bible. Many Christians don't know that Jesus was a Jew.
Really?
Well, because they don't take seriously the second chapter of the book of Luke, where it says that Joseph and Mary took their son to the temple, had him circumcised, and that she brought the appropriate sacrifices. So they were from Jews, right? They were observant Jews. It says so right there. What else? All right. So but most, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization. There are a lot of Christians in the world who don't understand that Jesus was a Jew.
How about these Germans leading up to the Holocaust?
Later. Don't touch it now.
Okay. I just wonder if they thought he was a Jew.
We're going to get there. Okay. I don't know specifically. I don't know how Lutheranism dealt with this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Luther knew that Jesus was a Jew.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure when he was talking, you got to be nice to the Jews because they are, he was a Jew. Our traditions flowed out of him, blah, blah, blah. He probably was saying those things. All right. But when you flip and it's black and white and you're now in the black side and there's no white, forget it. So, but I don't know how the Lutheran Church was anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, well before the Nazis coming. There's no question about that, okay? But again, the point is it was a German sect, and by the time they percolated, the Jews were gone. They were all in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
So they could talk about stories about the Jews, but they weren't around. That's the whole thing here. That's the irony of the whole thing. All right, Cheryl.
I don't want to open this as a discussion, but it strikes me the brood of vipers quote is repeated in both places in Matthew. And I just want to think later maybe if this has anything to do with the snake handling groups of primitive Christians that we had down south. Members of, they handle snakes as part of their religion.
I don't know. Remember, but
just throwing that in there.
Snakes. Where do we first read of snakes?
Adam and Eve.
How about Adam and Eve? Right. Where else do we hear about snakes?
And Moses and the staff turning into
Moses and his staff, right? Where else do we hear about snakes? In the wilderness, where the people complain, God sends poisonous snakes and tells Moses to make a bronze snake and hold it up, and the people will be cured. That's what it says.
Okay, so we got lots of snake references.
Very, very pagan, doesn't it? Okay, and it may have been written at a time when these things were okay to talk about because, well, the snake, you don't worship the snake, but we can still use it as a symbol. You know what Rashi says, getting back to Luther's friend, you know what Rashi says on that? Do you know what Rashi says? No, it's not that the snake did it, but they looked up to God. It focused the people's attention upward, and as they're looking beyond the snake to God, then the cure came in, okay? But again, as I had mentioned in the Bible class last night, that snake appeared in the temple, and King Hezekiah threw it out. It had already become the story of the brazen. It probably was written to explain how that snake came to have some circulation within the ancient Israelite community. But the fact is, it was in the temple. Whether they put it in there to get it out of the way so nobody would see it, I don't know. But Hezekiah found it, and he was really strong on his anti-paganism within the Israelites. He threw it away, had it destroyed. Okay, so snakes have always been things of, very scary. Well, look at Egyptian art, the snake, right? Snakes are all over the place. Powerful creatures, right?
I think I could be wrong on this. There's a psalm, actually, it's part of the Shabbat liturgy, that says you will tread on snakes and vipers.
Well, but that
if you believe in God, that you will be able to touch and hold snakes.
Well, that goes back to Adam and Eve.
The question was the Christian thing.
That goes back to Adam and Eve. Read the story where God tells the snake, you're going to crawl on the ground, right, and she and the descendants of Eve are going to step on you. It's right there in chapter 3 of Genesis. Okay. All right. Moving on. Okay.
About to make a vicious turn here.
Huh?
Luther's about to make a vicious turn in his own language.
Yeah. Well, remember, these are excerpts that I tied together here.
Okay.
Themes. Yeah. I mean, if you read the page in the Jewish virtual library, it's a whole series of excerpts that are not connected. I made them into artificial, and they're all his words, but I brought them together when similar ideas were sort of, presented. It made it easier just to comprehend his mind. All right, so that's what's here. All right, thank you, Bert. Anybody want to read The Blind Jews? Moving on. Somebody now, please. Page 1, the last paragraph.
I'll read.
Okay.
The blind Jews are truly stupid fools. Now just behold these miserable, blind, and senseless people. Their blindness and arrogance are as solid as an iron mountain. Learn from this, dear Christian, what you are doing if you permit the blind Jews to mislead you. Then the saying will truly apply. When a blind man leads a blind man, both will fall into the pit. Luke 6:39. You cannot learn anything from them except how to misunderstand the divine commandments.
All right, stop there. All right, so we're stupid and blind. Now, other times our enemies had called us very wise, but in a sneaky way. But here he's saying they're stupid and blind. And where is he heading with this last paragraph is the last sentence. All you can learn is how they misunderstand the divine commandment. Okay, what is he saying here?
That the Jewish understanding of Torah is wrong.
Right, exactly. Okay, because the commandments were taken by the church. And by the way, the church that had been the Catholic Church. If you read commentaries on this written by the great church fathers, you will see that these laws actually are seen as to be interpreted in a less ritualistic and in a more spiritual, because the Jews only getting back to physicality, we only understand the physical aspects like kashrut, okay? All those details in kashrut are not to be seen as actually affecting the kind of meat that you eat. They represent different tendencies within you that you have to control, nothing to do with the actual eating of the meat. And by the way, the first person to really interpret things in this more allegorical way was the great Jewish philosopher Philo, who lived in the first century of the Common Era in Alexandria. And he was interpreting that, yes, we eat the animals that are not violent, right? We eat peaceful animals because we believe that what you eat shapes your characteristic as a person. And we are peace-loving people because the meat that we eat generates peacefulness. Okay, so nothing to do with holiness, which is what it says in the Torah, separation, which is what it says in the Torah, but no, it gives us, it changes, it focuses our ethical orientation. That's allegorical. All right, so it's in that same vein, and I have not studied all of the connections between the Christian interpretation of things. Well, it's the same thing, circumcision, right? That's the best example. Paul said the pagans don't have to be circumcised. Okay, he was right, because that's a sign of the unique covenant between God and Israel. Leave it. Fine, good. Okay. But the point is, what came later on was the church, maybe Paul even began this, I don't recall. But the notion was taking from the Bible itself. You find it in Deuteronomy and Jeremiah and others, that the thing that's holding the Jews back from pure living, in their eyes, biblical, Jewish, okay, is this: we need a circumcision of the heart, okay, to go along with the circumcision on the body, because our heart has an overlay of hardness on it that prevents the proper messages from God and from our tradition to get in. So we have to circumcise your heart, and that will come at the end of days. Okay, Christianity picked up on that, and they say, now you understand where it came from. It came from us. That the circumcision mentioned in the Bible is not physical. The Jews believe it's physical, but that's not right. It really means it's spiritual. And Jesus came to provide for us the true meaning. That's what it says here. You misunderstand the divine commandments. Okay, those are some examples. Tybal.
I just wanted to say, when I wrote an Abschiren ritual for my child at age 3 for the first haircut, I connected the Orla to the Orla, the not cutting the trees, all those things till the 3rd year. There was a source textual-based connection to the circumcision of the heart as well.
Very interesting.
Not that I remember the details at the moment, but you said that and I remembered, because I still love thinking about his Abschiren.
Spoken like a good philosopher. Yes, indeed. Okay. Very good. All right, Barbara.
It seems to me that I don't like the word blindness in this thing. It should say ignorance, if he thinks you're so ignorant. To me, blind means you can't see your way, but ignorant would imply we're so stupid that we can't do anything. I'm just being...
Well, good. I agree with you. I don't like it either. No, but blind, he's using it as as spiritually blind, not just physically blind.
I understand that, but still, I guess it's because I'm an ophthalmologist.
I was just going to say that.
And then the second comment or a question is, I always thought that Paul's name was Saul before he became Christian.
Yes, Saul of Tarsus.
So that's why I always thought he was Jewish. So Saul was.
Of course he is.
Name.
Excuse me, Barbara. I mentioned this before. He admits he's Jewish.
Oh, I thought you said a few minutes ago. Oh, it was John that wasn't.
I said if you read chapters 10 and 11 of the book of Romans, you will see Paul says, "I am a Jew. I am."
Okay, so it's John that's not Jewish. I got mixed up then. John wasn't Jewish.
I don't know whether Paulus. It's some Greek name. I don't know.
Okay.
That was look. There are Jews. There are priests and even rabbis. Antigonos ich Socho is a sage mentioned in Pirkei Avot. Antigonos, what kind of a name is that? Greek. It's Greek name.
It's not Yiddish name.
You saw our crazy Greek wedding is Greek. Everything is Greek. All words come from Greek. Antigonos, great rabbi, Greek name. Okay? If he can be called Antigonos, Saul can be called Paul. A be gesund. All right. Moving on. Yes, we still have time.
Want me to still keep going?
Page 2. Yeah. Somebody read, please.
Do you want me to keep reading? I'll keep reading. If I can read with a Greek accent, I'll read.
No, just read. Go ahead.
I love that movie. Oh, God. Okay, therefore, be on your guard against the Jews, knowing that wherever they have their synagogues, nothing is found but a den of devils in which sheer self-glory, conceit, lies, blasphemy, and defaming of God and men are practiced most maliciously and veheming.
That's a mistake in there. I don't know where it came from.
And something his eyes on them.
Yeah, stop there.
Okay.
All right. The synagogue is a den of devils. Where have you heard that before?
Last week we had it. They were drinking blood in the synagogue.
Yes, but it came before that. Last semester.
Bible, you don't know?
It was one of those
last
Greek people,
semester,
wasn't it? With the Greek guy, the Greek with a P, Pinus, or I forgot his name.
Oh no, John Chrysostom.
Okay.
John Chrysostom, Antioch, 388. 8 sermons against the Jews. Remember, his whole purpose was to keep the Christians from going to the synagogue, because they were going there because they believed that the Spirit of God was there, especially with the sacred scrolls. They were not denying their Christianity, but he was afraid that eventually they would be sucked in. Okay? So he gives 3, and he calls it is the synagogue of Satan. All right? And it's whether, I don't know if Martin Luther read Chrysostom. I can tell you that his works were being printed at that time. I can tell you that from about the 12th to 13th century, his teachings had become revived within church scholarship. And so it's very likely that this is a generationally transmitted thing that a Christian scholar would be aware of. Okay? I mean, it could have filtered down through other sources. I have never traced that whole, sequence. But the fact is, can you suggest this? Yes, you can. That this sounds very much. And this whole notion of getting rid of the synagogue, which if you read this, he gets into even greater detail later on, where he says, burn them, right? Clearly, it's because they scare him a little.
Yeah.
All right. And that goes back to Chrysostom in the 4th century of the Common Era, the bishop, of Antioch. Okay. All right. Continue on. Yes. Moreover.
Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. Moreover, they are nothing but thieves and robbers who daily eat no morsel and wear no thread of clothing which they have not stolen and pilfered from us by means of their accursed usury. Thus they live from day to day, together with wife and child, by theft and robbery, as arch thieves and robbers, in the most impenitent security.
So obviously the usury thing, the popes were already, and this is something he learned from Catholicism, that the Jews they should not do usury because they rule, that gives the Jews the lever to dominate Christians, and that's against the law. Jews cannot dominate. We are to be subjugated. Okay, so usury, you'll see that implicit in other things that he's going to write. Okay, so it's ironic. Well, not ironic. By that time, it had become so ingrained within the culture of Europe that it was understood that this is, and yeah, there were still a few Jewish moneylenders left in Germany. We know that for a fact. There were some towns with the expulsion of the Jews from Germany was piecemeal, either by town, by state. It was never uniform because there was no single Germany. There were a lot of principalities, right? But no unified Germany, as there was a unified France, unified England. Okay, not so in Germany. So it happened, it was a process that took place starting in the late 13th and continued down into the 16th. So there were not many doing it, but they're still around, and some of them are still doing their business. Yeah. Okay, Barbara.
It's kind of funny that he should pick out usurers in view of the fact that back in the day, the moneylenders were one of the major industries that Jews were thrown into by communities on purpose.
Well, not on purpose.
With very few things.
Let me correct you. No, Jews moved into it. I've said this before. Pay attention. They were merchants.
Right.
They were kicked out of the mercantile trade by competition.
Right.
Not by edict. And they had money because merchants have money. And so they were being squeezed out of this. So they said, how are we going to live? The kings, the princes, the wealthy, the knights needed money for various reasons. There were no Christian moneylenders at that point. The Jews had the money. So there was a shift to the Jews to get money. That's moneylending. And the charters that they got from the rulers allowed them to do that. Okay? They allowed them. It was legal.
Yeah, right. It was one of the few.
That's how it happened. Eventually, remember, the Jews were kicked out of money lending in the 13th century and thereon by Christian bankers who found loopholes to argue out of the. Remember, Christians cannot take money from Christians. That's against church law.
Really?
They can't take interest. They can lend, but no interest. Okay. Well, but they found ways of saying, well, we're not taking money on interest. These are fees that we have to add on because we are prevented from taking our money and invest it in a business because we're giving it as a loan. So somebody's got to pay us for the money lost, not being able to earn money in a business. The business was legal. All right. So that was their argument. And the church couldn't stop it, because the governments in Europe supported it. So eventually the Christian moneylenders took over. And by the way, they charged more money for interest than the Jews did. All right, so that's what happened. So, but usury, all right, subjugation of the Christian by the Jewish moneylender because he's got them, and the history was the government stood behind them because that money was the source of the taxes that the Jews paid the overlord. It wasn't out of charity. It wasn't out of love. It was taxes, tax money. That's what it is. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you, Cheryl. Somebody else now. However, okay, Paul.
Perfect mastery of the art of lying. They lie so clumsily and ineptly that anyone who is just a little observant can easily detect it. But for us Christians, they stand as a terrifying example of God's wrath. For if I had to refute all the other articles of the Jewish faith, I should be obliged to write against them as much and for as long a time as they have used for inventing their lies, that is, longer than 2,000 years.
All right, so we are liars, right? But it's interesting. We're not good liars. We're idiots. We're blind. So therefore, the lies that we tell, you can see right through them. You just have to do some research. And they've been lying for 2,000 years, right? Even before Jesus came along. That, again, you see, that's part of our character now. It doesn't say that this is a racial thing, but this is part of who we are, right? So it's not hard to jump from here to say, well, that's because they are part of this race, and that's how that race operates.
Talk about stereotyping.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's what the whole thing was about, But it's deeper. It's deeper. All right. So go ahead. Christ and
his word can hardly be recognized because of the great vermin of human ordinance. However, let this suffice for the time being on their lies against doctrine or faith. Alas, there cannot be anything but the terrible wrath of God, which permits anyone to sink into such abysmal, devilish, hellish, insane baseness, envy, and arrogance.
Wow. In other words, our ability to make up lousy lies and to keep promulgating these lies is part of God's punishment for us. That's what he's saying, right?
These are the words that these are the words.
God is saying, you want to lie? Fine, I'll help you lie. Are you going to make lies? And it's going to be stupid lies because you're stupid people.
Did any of the Jews at the time, did any of the Jews at this time that this was written, come back and say, you sound like a hateful religion. Your religion's hateful. Did that, or nobody, they just sat there and
there were books written by Jews for Jews.
Mm-hmm.
That had been, I mentioned it before, right? That had this tradition.
Yeah. But it was
there were Jews. The Jews, there were disputations in the 13th century. All right, real public disputation in France and in Spain, and again in the 15th century in Spain. All right, where Jews stood up and responded to the Christians' attempts to get Jews to use rabbinic traditions to prove the truth of Christianity. Did you hear what I said? The Christians are no longer using the Bible. They were using the Talmud and Midrash against the Jews by picking and choosing midrashim that seemed to be, which they could massage into a statement of the fact that text is really saying something positive about Jesus and about our faith. Okay, so that was going on. The Jews would not stand up and say, "You guys are a bunch of liars." They'd be killed. I mean, these were incidents that were supported not only by the church,
but by
the kings.
Mm-hmm.
And the Jews are not going to undermine. I mean, the most powerful arguments came from Nachmanides in the 1267 disputation in Barcelona.
Maimonides?
Nachmanides, Ramban, not Rambam.
Okay, now we're up to the third one. Wait, so it's Maimonides.
Brilliant scholar, mystic, Bible scholar, legalist, Spain, 13th century. Second
Nachmanides.
Giant. Means son of Nachman.
Okay.
Rabbeinu Moshe ben Nachman. You should never forget that name. Ramban. He's as great as Rambam. He is. It's just he dealt with mysticism. Rambam dealt with philosophy. Thomas Aquinas needed Rambam. So that's why everybody knows Maimonides. You open up a dictionary, you'll find Maimonides. Look for Nachmanides. You won't find him. But he's as brilliant in different ways. Giant. He stood up and tore apart the argument that were being made by the Christian argumenter, his interlocutor, because he knew. And he said, you're taking that out of context. It really means this. But he wasn't saying, that you guys are a bunch of idiots, because that would imply that the king was an idiot. He couldn't do it. So when these disputations, so yes, could the Jews write books for themselves? Sure. Look, I'm not sure yet. The Toldot Yeshu traditions, you've heard me say that before. You remember what it is? Anybody tell me what Toldot Yeshu was? Tybal, is your thumb up?
Yes, the polemics in Jewish sources about the human being now known as Jesus Christ.
Right. It takes the authors of this, the author and those who embellished it. It evolved over centuries, starting, I don't know, maybe 6th, 7th century CE, and continuing down to the time of Martin Luther and the 17th century. Okay. Whether Luther was aware of that per se, I don't know. In these, I would have hoped that well, there are allusions here to the nasty things that Jews say about Jesus. Whether it came from that or not, I don't know. But that book basically was a counter history to the Gospels. This is the true story of Jesus. Well, it's very creative, to say the least. Very creative. It's nasty. I'm going to give you an example. Maybe I should turn off the machine. Oh, what the heck? People should hear this anyway. It's okay. No, they have there's a scene there where the Jew, the representative of the rabbis, and Jesus both have now absorbed the power. No, this is Judah. Sorry. No, Jude, that's what it is. Yes. Judas and Jesus, both, Yehuda was his name, right? Both have absorbed the power of the name of God, and they are engaged now in a disputation in front of the king, or there was a queen, the queen, and they're fighting, right? And they're flying, they are up in the air, in the palace. Everybody's looking up, and they're wrestling up in the air. Finally, Judas figures out a way to do something to Jesus to negate the holiness of the name, and they would both lose their power, but at least now Judas could overwhelm him without the power, which equalized. Are you with me? So equal power, flying up in the air. What is it that Judas does to neutralize the power of this holy name?
Tell the truth?
Nope, it's nothing to do with words.
Oh, okay.
Tybal.
Does it have to do with his saying, being willing to take pagan followers?
What?
Being willing to take pagan followers.
Nothing ideological.
Not ideological, nothing with words. So is it the marriage of, I don't know how to say it, Cana, C-A-N-A?
No.
Something with,
no. Right, Margaret.
My guess is that it would be something really vile and physical.
Yes.
Yeah, like something really, probably even sexual.
Yes.
Circumcision?
Yeah.
No. Probably rape.
We just read about it in the Torah last week. What happens? What is it that renders a man impure?
Seminal emission, among other things.
Say again?
Seminal emission.
That is exactly right.
After you gave us a zillion hints. Yeah.
He released semen on Jesus. They both became defiled. That negated the power of the sacred name, and they both fell down on the ground. And when everybody saw this, they realized that Jesus was a faker. And then he gets taken care of because of that. Okay? That is found. Now, there were issues that bothered some Jews. So in some of the manuscript traditions, it says he urinated on him. Well, urine does not defile. Semen does. That's in the Torah. Okay? So, Margaret, you get 3 gold stars. But it fits in. You can see what the Jews are using this physiological thing, right, in order to tell this story. And I don't know if Martin Luther knew that, but if he did, he would say, you see, even in their stories, it's all physical. It's all physical. That's the doing of the devil in them. They're right this way. Who would ever think about what filthy people they are? Physical, devil, devil, devil. Of course, it's not a true story. Well, of course, it is not. It's a story. Anyway, getting back to your question, it is possible. These things were already beginning to be printed. I do know that they found volumes, and I forget right now, of books that were, it is 16th century. Right. That's right. In the 16th and 17th centuries, there were people began to collect, guess who? Monks began to collect Hebrew books. Again, you have these periods in time where Christian scholars want to learn Hebrew, either to get at the Jews, some of them know, to better understand the original Bible. That was legitimate on there, and they really believed it. It wasn't anti-Jewish. But among their collection of books, it was discovered in the late 19th and early 20th century, were a number of printed versions of the Toldot Yeshu HaNotzri, the story of Jesus the Nazarite. That's what it's called, Toldot Yeshu HaNotzri. And they were printed, as was Martin Luther's book. So that getting back to your point, that was written by Jews for Jews. So when they heard stories from the Christian Bible, if Christian monks broke into the synagogues or they had to listen to 4 sermons, they would have this, they would say, oh yeah, we know what that really means, you dummy, thinking about the monk who's preaching to them. Okay? So yeah, that was the response. But it was not done. They did not stand up in front of the king and say, did you know that Jesus was really the son of a Roman soldier who had sex with Mary, who was already engaged to Joseph and hence off limits? In addition to which, when she had her Nida, she was having her, it was that time of the month, right? She was menstruating, engaged, raped by a Roman soldier named Panther. I told you about that. And therefore, you have Yoshke Panther, right? That old Talmudic name, which was transmitted through these stories of Jesus that the Jews concocted in this Toldot Yeshu. Am I confusing you? I hope not. You understand here that we truly did not have any power. That's the irony of the whole thing. He's going to say that the Jews are using these things to control Christians. You'll see that. And that was a fear. That was by the way, you will find that again when we get to the 20th century, that the Jews try to control everything. Where do you find that in the 20th century? We will read the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that wonderful book of history. Okay? So that theme of Jews controlling pops up here even in the 16th century. And the point is, of course, from the church's perspective, that's a no-no. As I said 3 times, the Jews, according to church doctrine, are supposed to be subjugated if you live in the 16th century, whether you're a Lutheran or you are a Catholic. And by the way, I don't know all the ins and outs of Lutheranism, but like the Anglican Church, the Lutheran Church, Reformed, right? These are part of the Reformation, but they're both very much similar in their use of ritual, and in their basic approaches are not that different, except for their structure of leadership and the issue of marriage, right? Lutheran priests and Anglican priests can get married. That was a big deal. And there is no pope. But, I mean, they're very, very traditionally oriented, as opposed to groups later on that were more text-oriented, like the evangelicals and all those, the other ones, the Methodists and the Presbyterians, were less oriented toward fixed ritual. The wafer, right? So that, I don't know how all the other churches handle it, but they are very traditionalistic. So these ideas that flowed down from the church, even though they rejected the church, a lot of those ideas stayed within the traditions that they were learning. Is that clear? That's something you got to keep in mind when you read all this stuff. But there's a lot of old stuff in here that just keeps going on. What time is it? Oh, we got to stop.
What can I just say? There's no way that Mary got pregnant while she was in her period. You can't do it. If the Panther raped her in the middle of her period, she couldn't have gotten pregnant. Of course not. Not a chance of happening.
Of course not. Okay. That's the whole point.
Okay,
it was a weird thing, It was as if, who knows the devil was running the whole show, right? The devil made him do it. So the devil manipulated the whole thing. You want to talk about demons? It was the devil that caused all that to happen.
Okay.
Say that, by the way, but maybe all right. We'll finish this next time. And in the next few days, you'll get a packet of wonderful things from the classical Islamic traditions.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.